The most terrifying thing on a midnight run isn't a blown tire or a patch of black ice. It's the feeling of being hunted. It started with a ghost signal on my CB, a voice that knew my name. Then my truck's electronics died, and I saw a figure watching me from an abandoned exit. Maybe it was just road fatigue. Maybe it was a reflection. That's what I told myself, right up until I realized they weren't chasing me to a trap. They were the trap. You listen to this, and you tell me what a man is supposed to do when the only safe harbor in the storm is the mouth of the monster. You want to know what real fear is? It ain't a blown tire on a downhill grade with a full load. It ain't a surprise inspection at a weigh station when you know you're running a little heavy. It's not even the sight of blue and red lights flashing in your mirrors when you've been pushing the pedal a bit too hard to make up time. Real fear, it's silence. It's when the whole world, a world that's usually screaming with the noise of the road, just goes quiet. And then, in that quiet, you hear something that shouldn't be there. My name's Frank. Been driving for 22 years. I've hauled everything from military hardware to toilet paper, crisscrossing this country more times than I can count. My rig, a Crimson Kenworth W900 named Ruby, she's been my only constant partner. I know every groan of her engine, every hiss of her air brakes, every rattle in the sleeper cab. She's my office, my home, my fortress. That night, she felt more like a tomb. The run was a milk run, a real sleeper. 3,000 miles, coast to coast, hauling palletized consumer electronics. Laptops, tablets, high-end stuff. A heavy load, but clean and simple. I was on the third leg, cutting through the gut of Appalachia on I-81, heading north. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. The kind of deep, bottomless night you only find in the mountains, far from the light pollution of any real city. The moon was a sliver, hiding behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the darkness outside my windshield was so complete it felt like it was pressing against the glass. The drone of the Cummins engine was my lullaby. The rhythmic slap of the tires on the pavement was the heartbeat. This was my zone. Just me, Ruby, and 40,000 pounds of somebody else's problem. I was feeling good, making good time. I had the CB on, but it was dead quiet. Not unusual for this time of night on this stretch. Most of the chatterboxes have already found a place to park it and are sawing logs. I switched over to the AM/FM, scanning for signal. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a voice to break the monotony. A little late-night talk radio, maybe some old country music. Static. A faint whisper of a sermon from some 100,000-watt preacher in Nashville. More static. Then I landed on it. It wasn't a station. There was no music, no ads, no friendly DJ. It was just a sound. A low, pulsing hum, almost below the range of hearing, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth more than you hear with your ears. And over it, a voice. It was monotone, calm, devoid of any emotion. 7, 4, 1, 9. Blackout on the wire. The road is closed. It repeated. The same numbers, the same phrase. It was a number station, maybe? Some Cold War relic still broadcasting its ghost signal out into the ether. I fiddled with the dial, trying to clear it up, but it was locked in. The signal was sharp, clear as a bell, despite the hum underneath it. I've heard stories, of course. Every driver who's been on the road long enough has heard the tales told in hushed tones at 3 in the morning over burnt coffee at a Flying J, stories about the siren's call or the whistler's frequency. Old legends about ghost signals that lure truckers off the road. They call it the blackout signal, a fairy tale to spook greenhorns. I chuckled to myself, a dry, tired sound in the cab. Some local kid with a powerful ham radio, probably getting his kicks scaring the daylights out of lonely drivers. Professional that I am, I dismissed it, an annoyance. I reached to switch the radio off, but the voice changed. It stopped the numbers. The hum deepened slightly. Unit 734. Kenworth. Crimson. Northbound on Interstate 81. Your load is required. The coffee in my thermos suddenly felt ice cold in my gut. My call sign for this particular haul was 734. My truck is a Crimson Kenworth, and I was, without a doubt, northbound on I-81. This wasn't a prank. This was specific. This was for me. A wave of cold dread washed over me. the kind that makes the hair on your arm stand up. Hijackers? Using a radio signal to psych out a driver before they make their move? It was sophisticated. Way too sophisticated. My training kicked in, overriding the fear. Don't engage. Don't react. Just drive. Be a professional. I kept my eyes glued to the road, my hands steady on the wheel. I scanned my mirrors. Nothing. Just miles of empty, dark asphalt stretching out behind me. The voice came again, its calm monotony more terrifying than any scream. Acknowledge. Unit 734. Your cooperation is expected. Pull off at the next exit. Exit 114. Await instruction. Exit 114. I knew that exit. It was a ghost exit, led to an old state road that was decommissioned years ago. Nothing there but woods and a crumbling, abandoned way station. No way in hell. My plan was to push on another 20 miles to the Starlight Truck Stop. It was small, but it was lit, and there would be other people. Safety in numbers. I wasn't stopping for anything. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white, and drove right past the green sign for exit 114. The moment my trailer cleared the ramp, it happened. My headlights, my dash lights, every single light in and on my rig blinked out. For one solid second, I was plunged into a terrifying, absolute blackness, still doing 65 miles an hour down a mountain highway. Then, just as suddenly, they all flickered back to life. And in the renewed glare of my high beams, I saw it, reflected for just a fraction of a second in my rearview mirror. Standing at the top of the exit ramp I just passed, motionless under the dark sky, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, a silhouette of black against black, and it was watching me go. My heart hammered against my ribs like a piston gone wild. My foot instinctively eased off the accelerator, but I caught myself, forcing it back down. 65 miles an hour. Maintain speed. Don't show weakness. My eyes flicked from the road to the mirrors and back again, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The exit ramp was shrinking in the distance, swallowed by the oppressive dark. The figure was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. Had it been there? For a terrifying moment, I questioned my own sanity. A 22-year veteran doesn't see spooks on a roadside. You see deer, you see bears, you see shredded tires that look like dead animals in the dark. You don't see impossibly thin men materializing on empty exit ramps. I reached for the radio dial, my hand shaking slightly. I had to get that voice out of my cab. It felt like a violation, like it had left a greasy film on the inside of the windshield. I twisted the knob. Static. I twisted it again. More static. But when I came back to the original frequency, it wasn't the voice or the hum. It was nothing. A profound, dead silence, heavier than any static. The channel was still there, a dead spot on the dial, but it was open, waiting. I tried the CB. I keyed the mic, breaker 19. How's it looking northbound on 81? I asked, my voice sounding strained and thin. Nothing. Not a hiss, not a crackle. The radio was dead. My entire comms panel was dark. The electrical surge, the flicker, it had fried them. Okay, deep breath, Frank. I told myself. Analyze. Don't panic. Panic gets you killed. I started breaking it down, forcing the pieces into a shape that made sense of my world. The world of diesel, asphalt, and human predators. This wasn't a ghost story. It was a hijacking. A damn sophisticated one. The radio broadcast? They must have a powerful mobile transmitter. They scouted me, maybe at the last way station. Got my call sign, my truck color. They were trying a new kind of psychological warfare. Scare the driver, make him compliant, get him to pull over on their terms. The electrical surge? That was their hammer. An EMP device, maybe. I'd read articles about them. Small, localized pulse weapons that can scramble electronics. They hit me with it when I blew past their designated spot. It was a warning shot. It didn't disable the engine control module, thank God, but it was meant to show me they could. And the figure? That was the lookout. The spotter for the crew. Just some guy in dark clothes. The night and my own rattled nerves had turned him into some kind of monster in my mind. It had to be. This was my false explanation. My shield against a truth my brain refused to process. It was terrifying, but it was a fear I understood. Men with guns I can deal with. Shadowy specters on the highway? That's not a language I speak. My resolve hardened. The fear curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger. They wanted to play games? Fine. I've been playing the game of survival on these roads since before their spotter was out of diapers. They wanted my cargo? They were going to have to bleed for it. My new destination was no longer just a preference. It was a fortress to be reached. The Starlight Truck Stop. 20 miles. Light, people, phones that worked. I kept my eyes peeled, scanning the darkness behind me for any sign of pursuit. Blacked out sedans, another rig closing the distance too fast. But there was nothing. Just the same lonely stretch of I-81 winding through the sleeping mountains. The lack of pursuit was almost more unnerving than a chase. They were confident. They thought they had me. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A faint, hazy glow over the next ridge. The starlight. Relief washed over me, so powerfully my knees felt weak. It was a beautiful sight, a beacon of greasy food, hot coffee, and human noise. Safety, I signaled, guiding Ruby down the off-ramp, the air brakes hissing in the quiet night. The truck stop was just as I remembered it. A dozen rigs parked in neat rows, the main building glowing with a warm, yellow light. I could make out the big neon sign on the roof. Starlight Truck Stop. Below it, in red script, eat and fuel. I was home free. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 20 miles. The tension in my shoulders began to dissolve. My story about sophisticated hijackers already sounded a little thin, even to me. Maybe it was just a string of bizarre coincidences. Maybe I was just tired. Then the radio crackled. It wasn't static this time. It was a sharp, electric pop that made me jump in my seat. The dead channel came alive. The same calm, chillingly monotone voice filled the cab, as clear as if the speaker were sitting in the passenger seat beside me. We appreciate your determination. Unit 734. The starlight is waiting. My blood ran cold. My eyes snapped up to the neon sign, and as I watched, the lights on the sign began to flicker, one by one, in a slow, deliberate pulse. The L, the G, the H, the T, the R, the U, the C, the K. They all went dark, leaving scattered, glowing letters behind. My mind scrambled to read the broken message. S, T, A, R, L, I, G, H, T, T, O, P, no. That wasn't it. The remaining letters burned into the darkness. A new message just for me. S, T, A, Y. And below it, the red script had changed too. The F and the L in fuel were dead. Eate ue. Eat. And you. The voice on the radio whispered one last thing before the channel went dead again, leaving me in a silence more terrifying than any scream. Welcome. I slammed on the brakes. The air hissed in protest, and the full weight of the 40,000-pound trailer shoved against the fifth wheel, sending a shudder through the entire rig. Ruby groaned to a halt right there in the middle of the off-ramp, maybe 100 yards from the entrance to the truck stop parking lot. My hands were clamped to the steering wheel, my knuckles bone white. My breathing was shallow, ragged. I stared at the sign, at the broken neon message burning into my retinas. Stay, eat, and you. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a glitch in the wiring. It was a statement, a billboard-sized threat delivered with impossible precision. My carefully constructed theory of sophisticated hijackers crumbled into dust. An EMP? Fine. A scout on the highway? Plausible. But this? Rewiring a 50-foot neon sign on the fly to send a personalized threat? This was something else entirely. This wasn't human. My mind reeled, trying to find a new box to put this in, a new label that would make it manageable. It couldn't. It was like trying to fit the ocean into a coffee cup. The starlight, my beacon of safety, had just transformed into the gaping mouth of a trap. The calm voice on the radio echoed in my head. The starlight is waiting. They weren't chasing me. They didn't need to. They were already there, waiting for me to deliver myself. The sweat on my palms made the leather of the steering wheel feel slick and alien. I had to get out of there. I couldn't go forward, and I sure as hell wasn't staying put. The only option was back the way I came. My trucker instincts, honed over 2 decades, took over. Backing a 70-foot tractor trailer up a curved off-ramp in the dark is a nightmare scenario. It's a maneuver that invites disaster, jackknifing, running off the shoulder into a ditch. But staying here felt infinitely more dangerous. I threw the transmission into reverse, the gears grinding in protest. The backup alarm, a piercing beep beep beep, shattered the silence. At least that still worked. I checked my mirrors, my head swiveling, trying to watch both sides of the trailer at once. The faint red glow of my taillights painted the asphalt behind me. Slowly, carefully, I started easing back. The trailer began to swing out, and I corrected, turning the wheel in the opposite direction. The tires scrubbed against the pavement. Foot by foot, I was crawling back toward the interstate, back toward the main artery of the world. Just get back on the highway, I told myself. Point the nose south. I don't care if it's the wrong way. I'll take my chances with a head-on collision over whatever was waiting for me in that parking lot. The rig straightened out. I was almost at the top of the ramp where it merged back with the highway shoulder. Another 20 feet and I'd be clear. A glimmer of hope, fragile as it was, began to flicker in my chest. I could do this. I could escape. That's when I heard it. A low, scraping sound from beneath the cab. It was a rhythmic metallic noise. Scrape, clang, scrape, clang. It was getting faster as I reversed. My eyes darted to the driver's side mirror, trying to see under the truck. The angle was wrong. I couldn't see anything, but the sound was growing louder, more violent. It sounded like something heavy was being dragged, something made of iron. Then, a sudden, violent lurch. The entire truck was jerked to a stop, so hard my teeth clacked together. The engine sputtered, choked, and died. The dashboard lights, which had been my only steady source of comfort, went out and stayed out. The only illumination now was the sickly yellow glow from the corrupted sign ahead and the dim red of my taillights behind. The silence that rushed and was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not a click, not a groan from the starter. It was dead. Utterly, completely dead. The trap hadn't just been waiting ahead of me. It had been underneath me, too. I looked in my mirror again, peering into the darkness. And then I saw it. The faint red light of my own taillights was reflecting off something on the pavement just behind my drive wheels. It was a chain. A thick, rust-caked anchor chain. The kind you'd see on a massive ship, not on a highway. One end was wrapped tight around my drive axle, cinched on like a python. The other end stretched back into the darkness of the ramp, disappearing from view, pulled taut as a guitar string. It was as if I had been snared by a deep-sea fishing lure. My escape route was gone. Ruby, my fortress, my partner, was crippled. I was anchored to this place. And from the direction of the silent truck stop, through the cold, dead air, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice. It was the slow, rhythmic creak of screen door opening. The creak of that screen door was the starting pistol for a race I was already losing. My sanctuary was a cage, my escape route was a dead end, and now the zookeeper was coming to check on his new prize. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, get out of the truck, flee into the woods. But where would I go? I was in the middle of nowhere, in mountains I didn't know, with something that could disable a 40-ton truck and rewire a neon sign from a distance. Running blindly into the dark felt like jumping from the frying pan directly into the fire. Ruby was dead beneath me, but she was still 80,000 pounds of steel and glass. She was cover. I killed the remaining lights, flicking the master switch, plunging the cab into near-total darkness. The only light came from the cursed sign and the sliver of moon that had finally broken through the clouds. I sank lower in my seat, my head barely above the level of the dashboard, peering through the gap between the steering wheel and the gauges. My heart was a frantic drum against the silence. From the main building of the truck stop, a figure emerged. It stepped out of the doorway and onto the small, concrete porch. It wasn't the impossibly thin silhouette from the exit ramp. This was a man, or at least it had the shape of one. He was big, burly like a dock worker, and he moved with a slow, deliberate confidence that was terrifying. He was too far away for me to make out his face, but I could see he was wearing what looked like a mechanic's jumpsuit, stained and dark. He stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, just looking out at my crippled rig on the ramp, surveying his catch. He took a step off the porch and started walking toward me. Not running, just a steady, unhurried walk. As he moved, a second figure appeared in the doorway, then a third. They were different shapes and sizes, but they all moved with the same eerie calm, fanning out as they walked, their footsteps silent on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. There were 5 of them in total. They didn't speak. They didn't gesture to each other. They moved like a pack of wolves, a coordinated, silent hunt. This changed everything. My mind, desperate for a rational explanation, latched onto it. This wasn't a ghost. This was a crew. The impossible things, the radio, the sign, the chain, they were just tricks. Advanced technology, maybe something I couldn't comprehend, used to disorient and terrify their target. The real threat was these men. This was their territory, their hunting ground. They had rules, and I had just broken them. The ancient evil wasn't a specter from some forgotten legend. It was a deeply rooted, predatory system that had claimed this piece of road as its own. They were using the terrain, the isolation, the trucker folklore itself as a weapon. They had turned the blackout signal from a ghost story into an operational tool. They were the reason this exit was abandoned, the reason this truck stop felt so wrong. They weren't just hijackers interested in my cargo. The personalized message on the sign, "Eat and you," suggested something far more sinister. They weren't just taking the freight, they were taking the driver. As they got closer, the faint moonlight caught something in the hand of the lead man. It was a long, heavy tool, a tire iron maybe, or a pry bar. The others were empty-handed, but they didn't need weapons. Their silent, synchronized advance was weapon enough. They split up, 2 moving to the right of my rig, 2 to the left, while the leader continued his slow, straight path directly toward my driver's side door. They were systematically cutting off any potential escape, hurting me. I scrambled in the dark cab, my mind racing. A weapon. I needed a weapon. I always kept a tire thumper, a short, heavy wooden club used to check tire pressure, tucked between my seat and the center console. My fingers fumbled for it, closing around the familiar, worn wood. It wasn't much against 5 men, but it was better than nothing. It was something solid in a world that had gone completely insane. The leader was 50 feet away now. 40. I could hear the faint crunch of his boots on the gravel shoulder of the ramp. I held my breath, pressing myself against the back of the seat, trying to become invisible in the shadows of my own truck. He stopped about 20 feet from my door, just outside the effective range of a desperate lunge. He tilted his head, as if listening, as if he could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then he did something that shattered my last hope of this being a normal, albeit brutal, hijacking. He slowly raised his left hand. He didn't wave, he didn't signal. He just held it up, palm facing me. And from the center of his palm, a small, intense pinprick of red light began to glow, like the hot end of a cigar. It pulsed, softly at first, then with increasing strength, matching the rhythm of the thumping in my own chest. The hum, the same low-frequency hum from the radio, filled the air again. It wasn't coming from a speaker this time. It was coming from him. And as the red light in his hand pulsed, the dead electronics in my cab flickered back to life for a single, horrifying second. The dashboard lit up, the CB crackled, and the radio display flashed a single, mocking word. Found. The word found burned itself onto the back of my eyelids. The pulsing red light, the hum that vibrated through the floorboards. This wasn't technology. Not in any way I understood it. The line between a sophisticated crew and something ancient and unknowable had just been erased. My mind was screaming, but my body was frozen. The man with the glowing hand took another deliberate step closer. The game was over. They knew I was in here. They were just savoring the moment. In that instant of pure, paralyzing terror, a new sound cut through the night. It was the roar of a diesel engine, loud and familiar, coming from the interstate. Headlights crested the hill behind me, blazing bright, washing out the faint moonlight. A truck, another truck. He was northbound just like I had been. Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through me. He would see me. He'd see my rig stalled on the ramp, he'd see these men surrounding it. He'd have to stop, or at the very least, he'd get on his CB, which was surely working, and call it in. The 5 figures surrounding my truck didn't even flinch. They didn't look back at the approaching rig. Their attention remained locked on me. The leader slowly lowered his glowing hand, the red light fading into his palm as if he'd simply closed a fist around a burning coal. The approaching truck geared down as it neared the exit, its engine brake breaking with a thunderous brap 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 that echoed off the mountains. It was an old Peterbilt, a classic 379, with a long nose and more chrome than a classic car show. He was slowing down. He saw me. He pulled onto the shoulder of the interstate, just past the top of the ramp, and killed his headlights, leaving only his amber running lights on. It was a gesture of courtesy, not wanting to blind me. A professional move. My heart soared. An ally. A brother of the road. I had a chance. The silent men still hadn't moved, but their unhurried stillness now seemed less like confidence and more like waiting. The driver's side door of the Peterbilt creaked open and a figure climbed down. He was a silhouette against his own running lights. A big man with the rolling gait of a lifer. He started walking down the ramp toward me. "Hey driver," he yelled, his voice a gravelly boom. "You having trouble there?" My voice was stuck in my throat. I fumbled for the door handle, ready to burst out, to scream for help, to tell him to call the cops, the National Guard, anyone. But something held me back. The utter lack of reaction from the 5 men. They just stood there, patient as statues. The leader with the deadlight hand watched the approaching trucker with an unnerving lack of concern. The new trucker kept walking. "Looks like you're hung up pretty good," he said, his voice closer now. He was about halfway between his rig and mine. "Happens to the best of us. What's the issue?" "Axel." I finally found my voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. "Stay back. It's a trap. Call the police." He stopped. He put his hands on his hips, tilting his head. "Trap? Son, the only trap I see is the one you drove yourself into. Looks to me like you got yourself tangled in some old clearing chain." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that didn't sound friendly at all. "That's what you get for trying to run." A cold dread washed over me, colder than anything I'd felt before. Try to run. How could he know that? He took a few more steps, and his face came into the jaundiced glow of the Starlight sign. He was older, with a thick gray beard and a mesh-back cap pulled low over his eyes. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were dark and empty, like holes punched in a sheet of paper. He wasn't looking at me with concern. He was looking at me the way a farmer looks at a pig in a pen. He gestured with his thumb back towards his own gleaming rig. "Don't you worry. We'll get you untangled. The Starlight provides. We always have room for one more. We'll get your cargo unloaded, get you a hot meal." The leader of the 5 silent men finally moved. He turned his head slowly to look at the bearded driver and gave a short, sharp nod. The bearded driver nodded back. They knew each other. This wasn't an ally. This wasn't a random trucker stopping to help. He was one of them. The beautiful, powerful Peterbilt on the shoulder wasn't a rescue vessel. It was the hearse. He was the shepherd, the Judas goat, sent to calm the panicked sheep before the slaughter. My last flicker of hope wasn't just extinguished. It was doused in gasoline and thrown into a furnace. The bearded driver smiled, a wide, predatory grin that didn't reach his dead eyes. "Now, why don't you be a good fella and open that door? It's a long night, and we've got work to do." He took a step closer, and then another. "Don't make us come in and get you. It gets messy, and we hate to damage the merchandise." The word merchandise hung in the air, cold and sharp. He wasn't talking about the electronics in my trailer. He was talking about me. Every horror story I'd ever half listened to, every dark rumor about vanished drivers and cannibal cults in the Appalachian hollows, came rushing back. No longer folklore, but a terrifying, unfolding reality. This wasn't a hijacking crew. This was a harvest. And I was the crop. The bearded driver, the false ally, was there closer. He was the friendly face, the voice of reason meant to lull the prey into submission. When the spooky stuff didn't work, he was plan B. I looked from his dead-eyed grin to the 5 silent figures fanned out around my truck. There was no way out. Fighting was suicide, but surrendering felt like a worse fate. My mind, stripped of all higher function, was left with a single, primal command: escape. I feigned surrender. It was the only card I had left to play. I let my shoulders slump, let the tire thumper fall from my hand onto the floor with a dull thud. I raised my hands slowly, making sure they were visible through the windshield. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling, but loud enough for him to hear. "Okay, don't hurt me. I'll come out." The bearded driver's grin widened. "There now, that's a smart man. See? No need for any unpleasantness." He gestured for me to open the door. My plan was desperate, a long shot born of pure adrenaline. The driver's side door was my only exit, but it was watched by the leader and 2 others. The passenger side was my target. It faced the dark, wooded embankment that sloped down from the side of the ramp. If I could get out that door, I could use the truck itself as a shield for a few precious seconds and scramble into the trees. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only one I had. Doors jammed. I lied, my voice cracking. The electrical surge must have locked it. I'll have to climb over to the passenger side. The bearded driver exchanged a look with the leader. A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossed his face. "Fine," he grunted. "Just be quick about it." This was it. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, sliding across the worn leather of the bench seat. Every inch felt like a mile. I could feel their eyes on the truck, waiting. I reached the passenger side, my hand hovering over the door handle. In one fluid, explosive motion, I slammed the lock up, yanked the handle, and threw my shoulder against the door. It burst open with a groan. For a split second, I saw freedom. The dark slope of the embankment, the thick tangle of trees just 20 feet away. I threw one leg out, ready to launch myself into the darkness. But my escape was met not with empty air, but with a solid, unyielding force. One of the 5 silent figures was already there. He'd anticipated my move, circling the front of the truck in the blind spot created by the hood. I hadn't seen him. I hadn't heard him. He was just there. He was smaller than the others, wiry, and his face was pale and gaunt in the moonlight. He didn't try to grab me. He didn't say a word. He just braced his hands against the outside of the door and shoved. The force was incredible, inhuman. It was like being hit by a small car. The door slammed back into me, catching my leg and torso. The air flew from my lungs in a pained gasp, and a starburst of agony erupted in my knee. I was thrown back across the cab, my head cracking hard against the driver's side window. The world swam in a dizzying haze of pain and flashing lights. The wiry man leaned into the cab, his face just inches from mine. His eyes were wide and black, and a thin, unsettling smile played on his lips. He smelled of damp earth and something else, something sweet and rotten like spoiled meat. He reached in, not for me, but for the tire thumper lying on the floor. He picked it up, weighing in his hand. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the bearded driver's voice, now laced with cold fury. "Try to run. Now you've gone and made it messy." The wiry man looked at the tire thumper, then back at me. He raised it slowly. I tried to scramble back to shield my face, but my body wouldn't respond. My leg was a blaze of pain, my head a spinning vortex. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the blurred arc of my own tire thumper swinging towards my head. I woke up to the smell of frying bacon and stale coffee. For a disoriented moment, it was comforting, a familiar scent from 1,000 roadside diners. Then the pain hit, a dull, throbbing drumbeat behind my eyes and a sharp, searing fire in my left knee. I tried to move, but my hands were bound tight behind my back with what felt like a thick zip tie. I wasn't in my truck. I was sitting in a booth. A sticky vinyl booth, torn in places, the stuffing poking out like yellowed guts. My eyes cracked open, adjusting to the dim, greasy light. I was inside the Starlight Truck Stop. It was a caricature of a diner, a place assembled from memory by someone who didn't quite get it right. The chrome fixtures were pitted and dull. The checkered linoleum floor was scuffed and grimy, with dark, unidentifiable stains mottling its surface. The air was thick and heavy, the smell of bacon unable to cover a deeper, cloying sweetness of rot and decay. The place was empty, save for one person. The bearded driver, the false ally from the roadside, was behind the counter, flipping something on a griddle. He wore a stained white apron over his jumpsuit now, playing the part of a short-order cook. He hadn't noticed I was awake. He was humming to himself, a tuneless, discordant melody that grated on my raw nerves. I sat perfectly still, my mind frantically trying to piece together what had happened. They brought me here, into the heart of the trap. This wasn't just their hunting ground, it was their lair, their processing plant. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I looked around the diner, my eyes darting, searching for anything. An escape route, a weapon, a reason. The windows looking out onto the parking lot were thick with grime, but I could just make out the silhouette of my rig, Ruby, still chained to the off-ramp like a beached whale. Parked next to her was the gleaming Peterbilt, looking predatory and clean, a stark contrast to the decay of this place. My gaze fell on the wall behind the counter. Tacked up next to a dusty, fly-specked menu were dozens of photographs. Polaroids, faded and yellowed with age. They were pictures of trucks. All kinds. Kenworths, Freightliners, Volvos, Macs. Beneath each truck, in neat, handwritten script, was a date and a name. My blood ran cold. These were trophies. A gallery of victims. Some of the dates went back decades. This had been going on for a very, very long time. Then I saw the empty space on the wall. A single, clean thumbtack waiting for a picture of a crimson Kenworth W900, waiting for the name Frank. The cook flipped the bacon onto a plate with a greasy sizzle and turned around. His dead eyes met mine. The predatory grin returned. "Ah, Sleeping Beauty is awake," he rumbled. "Good. Just in time for breakfast. Last meal's on the house." He ambled over, placing the plate on the table in front of me. It was a heap of bacon and scrambled eggs, but the eggs were a pale, sickly gray, and the bacon was burnt to a black crisp. "Don't be shy. Eat up," he said, his voice dripping with false hospitality. "You'll need your strength." What is this place?" I managed my voice raspy. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "It's a way station of a sort. We weigh the soul, you see, not the cargo. Some souls are heavy, full of fight, full of fear. Those are the best ones, the tastiest." He leaned in closer, his breath a foul mix of coffee and corruption. "We've been here a long time. The road provides for its own. People vanish out here all the time. Bad curve, fell asleep at the wheel, ran off into a ravine. Easy. Nobody ever looks too hard." My eyes darted to the photographs again. All those drivers. "Fuel," he said, the word coming out like a serpent's hiss. "Everything needs fuel to run, son. Trucks, man. Some things need something a little more vital." This was the true nature of the cage. It wasn't just a place. It was a system. A symbiotic, parasitic ecosystem living off the lifeblood of the highway. The radio signal, the tricks, the silent hunters, they were all part of a larger, living trap designed to lure, capture, and consume. The Starlight wasn't just a diner, it was a stomach. And I was the next meal. My gaze fell past the cook, towards the back of the diner. There was a door, one of those swinging kitchen doors with a circular window. Through the grimy glass, I could see movement. The leader, the one with the glowing hand, was standing over a large stainless steel table. He was holding something, a Polaroid camera. He raised it, pointing it not at me, but out the grimy front window towards my truck. He was taking the picture for the wall. The cook saw where I was looking. "Don't mind him. That's the shepherd. He's just cataloging the inventory." He patted my shoulder with a hand that felt as heavy as a side of beef. "Now eat. The shepherd doesn't like his food to get cold." He turned and walked back to the counter, leaving me alone with a plate of inedible food and the crushing, absolute certainty that the swinging door to the kitchen was the last door I would ever walk through. Time dissolved into a thick, syrupy dread. I don't know how long I sat there in that booth, hands bound, knees screaming, a plate of nightmare fuel cooling in front of me. Every instinct was a paradox. Stay still and quiet to avoid attention. Thrash and scream and fight for your life. My mind, battered and exhausted, couldn't settle on a strategy. It was like a radio caught between two stations, producing nothing but static and noise. The sheer psychological pressure was immense. The silence from the kitchen was worse than any threat. A simmering pot I knew was about to boil over. The cook, the one they called the bearded driver, seemed to be ignoring me. He was meticulously wiping down his already filthy counter with a rag that probably made it dirtier. It was a mundane domestic act that was utterly terrifying in its context. He was a butcher tidying his shop before the next job. The shepherd remained out of sight behind the swinging door, the silence from his workshop a heavy blanket over the diner. My exhaustion was a physical weight. My eyelids felt like lead. The adrenaline that had propelled me this far had burned out, leaving behind a hollow, trembling fatigue. My thoughts grew sluggish, my perceptions blurred. Was this real? Was I having some kind of psychotic break on a lonely stretch of highway? Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel, and this was all a drawn-out, hyper-realistic nightmare before the final impact. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. The greasy plate, the torn vinyl, the gallery of dead truckers on the wall. It was all still there. The reality of it was more horrifying than any dream. This exhaustion was my enemy. It was making me slow, making me stupid. It was what they wanted. A docile animal is easier to lead to the slaughter. I had to fight it. I focused on the pain in my knee, letting the sharp, electric jolts be my anchor to the moment. I subtly tested the zip tie cutting into my wrists. It was thick, industrial-grade plastic. No give. My fingers, numb and clumsy, felt for the release mechanism, but it was cinched tight, the lock inaccessible. I scanned the table in front of me. Salt shaker, pepper shaker, a sticky bottle of ketchup, a metal napkin dispenser. Nothing. Nothing that could be a weapon. Nothing that could be a tool. My gaze drifted across the floor, searching for anything, any small advantage. A loose piece of tile, a stray bolt. My eyes landed on the plate of food. The burnt bacon was brittle, almost crystalline. The gray eggs were congealed into a rubbery mass. Disgusting. Useless. Then I saw the fork. It was lying beside the plate, an old, cheap diner fork. 3 tines, not 4. One of them was bent slightly outward. They'd left me a fork but no knife. A deliberate choice. A mockery. You can eat, but you can't cut. You can't fight. It was another one of their little psychological games. But my desperate, fading mind latched onto it. A fork. It wasn't much, but it was metal. It was pointed. The cook had his back to me. He was still humming that awful, tuneless song. I had to get it. But how? My hands were bound behind me. I tried to lean forward to see if I could somehow maneuver my bound hands under my legs and to the front. The pain in my knee exploded as I shifted my weight, and a groan escaped my lips. The cook stopped humming. He turned his head slowly, his dead eyes pinning me to the booth. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Food not to your liking?" "My knee." I gasped, the pain a convenient and very real excuse. I think it's broken." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. For a second, I thought he was going to come over, that I'd lost my chance. But then he just shrugged. "It'll stop hurting soon enough," he said, and turned back to his counter. My heart was pounding. That was a mistake, a critical error. I'd drawn his attention. My desperation was making me sloppy. I had to be smarter, quieter. I waited, forcing my breathing to even out, letting the minutes crawl by. I listened to the rhythmic squeak of his rag on the counter, the buzz of a fly somewhere in the diner, the frantic drumming in my own ears. I waited until I was sure his attention had drifted again. Then I moved, not with my body, but with my foot. Slowly, painstakingly, I slid my right foot out from under the table. I hooked my heel on the edge of the booth seat, pushing myself up just an inch. The movement sent a fresh wave of agony through my injured leg, but I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound, tasting blood. From this new, slightly elevated position, I could just reach the edge of the table with the toe of my boot. I stretched, my muscles screaming in protest. My boot nudged the plate. It scraped against the formica. I froze. The cook didn't turn. I nudged it again, gently sliding it closer to the edge. The fork, resting beside it, slid with it. Closer, closer, until finally, with one last, tiny push, the fork tipped over the edge of the table and clattered onto the vinyl seat of the booth, hidden from view. I sank back down, sweat pouring down my face, trying to appear completely still. The cook hadn't heard it. The first step was done. The tool was within reach of my bound hands. But as relief washed over me, the swinging door to the kitchen creaked open. The shepherd stepped out, wiping his hands on a bloody rag. He held the newly developed Polaroid in his hand. He walked to the wall of trophies, looked me right in the eye, and pinned the picture of my crimson Kenworth to the empty space. Then he turned to the cook. "He's ready," the shepherd said, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. "He's ready." 2 words. They hit me with the force of a physical blow. The games were over. The waiting was done. The cook, the bearded driver, tossed his filthy rag onto the counter and turned, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He and the shepherd moved towards my booth in perfect sync, their silent coordination as practiced as a dance. This was it, the absolute bottom, cornered, crippled, and about to be led into a backroom butcher shop by 2 monsters wearing human skin. My mind went into overdrive, a frantic cascade of pure animal panic. All attempts at rational thought evaporated, replaced by a single, blinding imperative: survive. My bound hands fumbled behind my back, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the fork I had managed to knock into the seat. It was a pathetic weapon, a child's toy against these 2, but was all I had. The shepherd reached me first. He was leaner than the cook, but he moved with a wiry strength that suggested tightly coiled springs. His eyes, unlike the cook's dead voids, were disturbingly alive. They were intelligent, ancient, and utterly devoid of anything resembling empathy. They were the eyes of a biologist studying an insect before pinning it to a board. He reached for my arm, his grip like iron bands closing around my bicep. "Time to go," he whispered, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He started to pull me up from the booth. The pain in my knee was a white-hot nova, and I cried out, stumbling against the table. The motion was clumsy, desperate, but it was the opening I needed. As he hauled me to my feet, my right hand, the one holding the fork, came clear of the booth's backrest. I wasn't strong enough to break his grip, not with my hands tied behind me. So I didn't try. Instead of pulling away, I lunged forward, into him, using his own momentum against him. I threw all my weight into the stumble, aiming for his partner, the cook, who was standing just to his right. The move caught them both by surprise. The shepherd grunted, staggering to maintain his balance. I crashed into the cook, my head slamming into his soft midsection. He let out a wheezing oof, and for a split second, our macabre trio was a tangled mess of limbs. In that chaotic moment, I acted. With my hands still bound behind me, I jabbed the fork backward and upward, a clumsy, blind strike aimed at the shepherd who was still gripping my arm. I wasn't aiming for anything vital. I was just trying to create pain, to create space. The tines of the cheap diner fork found a home in the soft flesh of his thigh. He let out a choked, inhuman shriek, a sound that was less pain and more pure, outraged fury. His iron grip on my arm vanished. I was free. I scrambled back, stumbling away from them, my injured leg threatening to give way completely. I put my back against the cold, greasy glass of the front window, holding the fork in front of me now, a useless-looking talisman in my bound hands. The shepherd looked down at the fork handle protruding from his leg, as if he couldn't comprehend it. He looked at the small, dark stain of blood spreading on his jumpsuit. Then he looked at me. The intelligent curiosity in his eyes was gone, replaced by a bottomless, glacial rage. He reached down and pulled the fork out with a single, sharp tug, barely flinching. He held it up, examining the bent tines, now slick with his blood. "An error," he hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "A flaw in the stock. It should have been docile." The cook had recovered his breath and was advancing on me from the left. The shepherd was on my right. They were fanning out, cutting off the small space I had, pinning me against the window. My rig, my beautiful ruby, was visible over the shepherd's shoulder, a crimson tomb under the jaundiced light. My eyes darted between them. The back of the diner led to the kitchen of horrors. The front door was 10 feet away, but it might as well have been 10 miles. I was out of tricks, out of luck, out of time. My desperate gambit had bought me maybe 10 seconds of freedom, and all it had accomplished was to make them angry. The shepherd took a slow step towards me, the bloody fork held pinched between his thumb and forefinger like a scalpel. The cook mirrored his movement. The walls were closing in. This was the end of the line. My defiant heart hammered against my ribs, a final, frantic protest against the inevitable. I was going to die here, in this filthy, forgotten corner of nowhere, another faded Polaroid on a killer's wall. The shepherd raised the fork. "We'll have to tenderize this one," he rasped. And from outside, in the dead-silent parking lot, Ruby's headlights flashed on, bright, brilliant, and impossible. The sudden glare of Ruby's headlights was a miracle. It sliced through the grimy diner window, catching the shepherd and the cook in its beam. They both flinched, throwing up hands to shield their eyes, hissing like creatures of the dark exposed to sunlight. My own heart seized, not with hope, but with utter disbelief. The truck was dead. The engine was choked, the electronics were fried, the battery was drained. It was impossible. Yet there it was, a blaze of defiant light in the oppressive darkness. The shepherd was the first to recover. The glacial rage in his eyes intensified, now mixed with confusion. He took a half step back from me, his attention shifting from his cornered prey to the impossible anomaly in his parking lot. "What is this?" he hissed, not to me, but to the cook. "The chain is set. The engine is cold." The cook stared, his mouth hanging slightly open. "I don't know," he stammered. It can't be." In that moment of their shared confusion, a flicker in the dark ignited in my own mind. It wasn't a plan, not yet. It was just a connection, a tiny detail I had logged but not understood. The way the leader, the shepherd, had made my radio talk, the way he'd made my lights flicker with a pulse from his hand, the way the whole system, the radio, the neon sign, the very truck itself, seemed to be part of their supernatural network. They didn't just disable things, they controlled them. They had turned my truck off. What if, just what if, I could figure out how to turn it back on? It was insane. I was a trucker, not a wizard. I hauled freight and changed tires. But I knew my rig. I knew her soul. 22 years we'd been partners. I knew every wire, every circuit, every quirk. And I knew that the heart of a modern truck isn't just the engine. It's the ECM, the engine control module. The computer brain that governs everything. They hadn't ripped it out. They had put it asleep. The key was the signal, the hum, the frequency, the unique signature of their power. I had felt it through the floorboards. I had heard it on the radio. It was the carrier wave for their control. My eyes darted around the diner, searching. My gaze landed on the counter. Next to the greasy cash register was an old jukebox, one of those classic Wurlitzer-style machines, dark and silent. But a small, red power light glowed on its base. It was plugged in. It had electricity, and like any old piece of audio equipment, it had an amplifier. It had speakers. It was designed to create vibrations, to create sound waves. The shepherd took a menacing step towards the front door of the diner, his eyes locked on my rig. "Something is wrong," he said to the cook. "The connection is frayed. Go check the chain. I'll finish this." The cook nodded dumbly and headed for the door, leaving the shepherd to deal with me. This was my chance. My only chance. It was a long shot based on a madman's theory, but it was better than dying on a stained linoleum floor. As the cook opened the screen door, I made my move. I didn't run for the door. I didn't charge the shepherd. I scrambled for the jukebox. I dove over one of the empty booths, my bound hands making the landing awkward, the pain in my knee screaming in protest. I crashed against the side of the machine, my back to the shepherd. "Fool," he snarled behind me. "You can't escape." I ignored him, my fingers fumbling behind my back with the cheap metal fork. It was bent, but the tines were still there. I jammed it into the space between the jukebox's power cord and the wall socket, trying to short it out, trying to create a spark, a surge, anything. Nothing happened. The plug was too snug. The shepherd was closing the distance. I could hear his soft footsteps on the grimy floor. I had seconds. My eyes scanned the back of the machine. I saw the speaker wires, thin, exposed copper leading from the main chassis to the external speaker terminals. An idea, pure and desperate, flooded my brain. It was the craziest thing I had ever thought of, a plan born of folklore and desperation. The blackout signal, the siren's call, it was all about frequency, all about resonance. With the shepherd just feet away, I did the only thing I could. I leaned my head against the wood grain of the jukebox, and with my hands still bound behind me, I began to hum. It wasn't a song. It was the sound, the low, pulsing hum I had heard on the radio, the hum that had vibrated from the shepherd's hand. I tried to replicate it, to match the pitch, the frequency, pouring all my fear, my anger, my 22 years of life on the road into that one resonant tone. I focused on the memory of the sound, channeling it from my chest, through my throat, and vibrating it against the wooden cabinet of the jukebox, right next to the amplifier's wiring. For a second, nothing happened. The shepherd paused, his head cocked, as if listening to a madman's final prayer. Then, the jukebox flickered. A single tube inside the amplifier glowed a faint, angry orange. The speakers crackled with static, and through them, my low hum was suddenly amplified, distorted, and blasted into the room. A deep, resonant, powerful wave of sound. It was the signal, their signal, and I was broadcasting it back at them. The moment the jukebox amplified my hum, all hell broke loose. The sound wave that erupted wasn't just loud, it was physical. It hit me in the chest like a fist, a deep, gut-rumbling bass note that was both my voice and something alien. The lights in the diner flickered violently, not like a bad connection, but in perfect, strobing rhythm with the pulse of the hum. Glassware on the counter rattled and danced, and the menu board behind the counter vibrated off its hooks, clattering to the floor. The shepherd shrieked, a high, piercing sound of agony that was the polar opposite of his calm, dry whisper. He staggered back, clutching his head, his face contorted in pain. It was as if the frequency that was the source of his power was now a poison arrow shot directly into his brain. He was vulnerable to his own weapon. My insane gamble, my desperate act of mimicry, had paid off. I hadn't just copied their signal. I had corrupted it, feeding it back into their network with the raw, chaotic energy of a human soul. Outside, the cook, who had just stepped off the porch, stumbled as if shot. He dropped to his knees, howling and pressing his palms against his ears. The Peterbilt on the shoulder, the Judas goat's chariot, began to convulse. Its running lights flashed erratically, out of sync with my hum, and its horn began to blare in a discordant, dying wail. I pushed myself up, my whole body trembling with the effort of holding the note, of keeping the pressure on. The jukebox was my weapon, the amplifier my cannon. I kept my head pressed against the wood, humming for my life, my throat raw, my lungs burning. The shepherd was on the floor now, writhing, the red light in his palm, flickering like a dying ember, spitting sparks. This was my window. The pain was their paralysis. I had to get to my truck. I broke away from the jukebox, and the hum instantly ceased. The silence that rushed in was deafening, broken only by the shepherd's ragged gasps and the distant, fading moan of the Peterbilt's horn. The reprieve was temporary. I knew they would recover. My first move was to free my hands. I scrambled over to the shepherd, who was curled on the floor, momentarily helpless. I avoided his face, his thrashing limbs, and grabbed the bloody fork from where he dropped it. I jammed the handle between my teeth and, with agonizing slowness, began sawing at the thick zip tie around my wrist with the bent tines. The plastic was tough. My teeth ached. It was like trying to cut a steel cable with a spoon. I sawed frantically, tasting my own blood mixed with the shepherd's. Seconds stretched into eternities. "Come on, Frank, come on." The plastic finally gave, snapping with a loud crack. My hands were free. They were numb, bruised, and screaming with the pain of returning circulation, but they were free. I grabbed the fork, my only tool, my lucky charm, and shoved it in my pocket. My next target was Ruby. I staggered towards the door, my injured knee protesting every step. The cook was still on his knees in the parking lot, disoriented. I didn't have time for him. I burst through the screen door into the cool night air. The parking lot was a scene of chaos. Ruby's headlights were still on, blazing a path of hope. The Peterbilt was dark and silent now, defeated. I limped, half ran toward my rig. 50 yards. Each step was a lifetime. I could feel the shepherd starting to stir behind me. I didn't look back. Looking back was death. I reached the side of my truck, my beautiful crimson fortress. The driver's door was still unlocked from my earlier capture. I hauled myself up, my arms shaking, my bad leg useless. I tumbled into the driver's seat, landing in a heap of pain and relief. The cab was dark. The dashboard was dead. The headlights were on, but the ignition was off. It was just a residual effect of the feedback loop I'd created. She had no power. The chain was still wrapped around her axle. I was in the driver's seat, but I was still in the trap. But my desperate plan wasn't just about escape. It was about retribution. They used my truck as part of their network. That meant the connection went both ways. I ignored the ignition key. It was useless. I ripped at the dashboard panel beneath the steering column. It came away with a screech of plastic. Behind it was a rat's nest of wiring. I didn't need a schematic. I knew these wires by heart. I found the main harness leading to the ECM. I found the thick, insulated wire that fed it primary power. Using the tines of the Ford from my pocket, I pierced the insulation, then did the same to the main power lead coming directly from the battery. Now for the final gamble. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only other piece of metal I had, my keys. The key to my house, the key to my toolbox, and the heavy brass key to Ruby's ignition. I bridged the two exposed wires with the metal shaft of the key. The moment it made contact, a massive arc of blue electricity erupted from the dashboard. The surge of raw, unfiltered battery power bypassed the sleeping ECM entirely. The starter screamed. The Cummins engine coughed once, twice, and then roared to life with a thunderous explosion of sound and black smoke. Ruby was alive. She was awake, and she was angry. The damn chain was still holding me. The truck strained against it, the whole frame groaning in protest, the drive wheels spinning uselessly on the pavement, kicking up sparks. From the corner of my eye, I saw the shepherd back on his feet, staggering out of the diner, his face a mask of pure, unholy rage. He was coming. This was it. All or nothing. I slammed the truck into first gear, my hand on the throttle, and pushed it all the way to the floor. The Cummins engine didn't just roar. It screamed a declaration of war. The tachometer needle leaped into the red, and the entire cab shuddered with a violence that threatened to tear it apart at the seams. Outside, the drive wheel spun against the asphalt, transforming rubber into thick, acrid smoke and bathing the entire off-ramp in a hellish, choking cloud. The whole rig bucked and strained like a beast trying to break its tether, the frame groaning under the impossible torque. I could feel the anchor chain, their supernatural snare, vibrating with a low, harmonic thrum, fighting against the raw, mechanical fury of my engine. The shepherd was marching through the smoke, a figure of pure malice emerging from the haze. His face was no longer calm or intelligent. It was a primal mask of fury. The illusion of humanity had been burned away, and what was left was ancient and predatory. He raised his hand, and the red light began to glow again, weak and sputtering, but still there. He was trying to regain control, to whisper my truck back to sleep. But I wasn't going to let him. I kept my foot mashed to the floor, pushing Ruby past every limit she had. The tires shrieked, the engine wailed, and the chain, that rust-caked length of impossibility, sang with tension. It was a battle of two worlds. His ancient, parasitic power against 2 decades of diesel engineering and a driver's sheer, bloody-minded will to live. Then, with a sound like a cannon shot that echoed across the mountains, something had to give. It wasn't the engine. It wasn't the transmission. It was the chain. A single, thick link, stressed beyond any physical limit, exploded in a shower of rust and incandescent sparks. The sudden release of tension was catastrophic. The rig shot forward like a stone from a slingshot, the trailer fishtailing wildly behind me. I fought the wheel, wrestling the bucking truck back, under control, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I was free. I didn't hesitate. I didn't cheer. I saw the shepherd, standing dumbfounded in the middle of the ramp, his face illuminated in my high beams, his expression one of complete disbelief. He had never lost before. His system was perfect, and a piece of flawed stock had just broken it. I saw the cook scrambling to his feet near the entrance to the lot. I saw the dark, silent shapes of the other hunters emerging from the shadows, drawn by the calamitous noise. My rage was a white-hot fire. They wanted my truck. They could have it. I cranked the wheel hard to the right, aiming not for the interstate, but directly at the heart of their operation, the Starlight Truck Stop. Ruby lurched off the pavement, her tires biting into the dirt and gravel of the parking lot. I aimed her nose right at the Judas goat, the gleaming, beautiful Peterbilt that had been my false hope. The collision was apocalyptic. 80,000 pounds of enraged Kenworth slammed into the side of the Pete, crumpling its polished chrome and sleeper cab like a tin can. The sound was a symphony of destruction, of shattering glass and shearing metal. But I wasn't done. I threw the rig into reverse, tearing free from the wreckage, and then aimed for the diner itself. The shepherd was screaming something, a wordless cry of fury, but it was lost in the roar of the Cummins. I floored again. Ruby, my faithful partner, my wounded warrior, smashed through the front wall of the Starlight Diner. The structure splintered around the grill, glass exploding with shattering. The counter, the booze, the cursed jukebox, it all dissolved into a chaos of debris under the weight of my charge. I drove right through the building, bursting out the back wall in a shower of insulation and siding, and finally ground to a halt in the woods behind. The engine sputtered, choked on its own fury, and died. Silence, abrupt and total, fell over the scene. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the first tentative lick of flames as the ruptured fuel tanks of the Peterbilt caught fire. I stumbled out of the cab, my body a single, screaming nerve of pain. The diner was a ruin. The Peterbilt was an inferno, casting flickering, dancing shadows everywhere. Of the shepherd and his crew, there was no sign. They had vanished, melted back into the darkness from whence they came. I didn't wait to see if they would return. I limped away from the wreckage of my life's work, away from the fire and into the deep, dark woods, following the highway north. I walked for what felt like days. At dawn, a state trooper found me, a half-mad, bleeding man in a torn shirt, babbling about ghost signals and men who eat souls. They said I'd had a psychotic break, that I'd crashed my rig into an abandoned truck stop due to exhaustion. They found the wreckage, of course. My truck, the other truck, the demolished diner. But they never found the chain. They never found the Polaroids. And they never found any bodies. It was just another tragic accident on a lonely stretch of Appalachian highway. I lost everything that night. My trach, my carrier, my sonitai. I don't drive anymore. I can't stand the sound of a diesel engine or the smell of stale coffee. I sit here now, in this clean, quiet room, and I tell my story to anyone who will listen, though most don't believe me. They give me medicine to make the memories go away, but they don't. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I turn on an old AM radio. I scan the static, past the preachers and the talk shows. And every once in a while, I find it. A dead channel. A low, pulsing hum you can feel in your teeth. It's always faint, distant, but it's there. They're still out there. The road still provides for its own. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that somewhere on that wall of trophies, there is a new, empty space. And they're waiting for a new picture of a new truck to fill it. The harvest is not over.